Rain fell like it had something personal against the city. It streaked down broken neon signs, pooled in potholes filled with oil and trash, and soaked into alleyways where people learned early not to ask questions. This was the kind of city that swallowed names and spit out rumors. Somewhere inside it, a man walked without one. He was known only as Shadow. No one knew where he came from. No records, no past that could be traced cleanly. To the people who whispered about him, he was a myth, a stray ghost that drifted between gangs, crime lords, and backroom deals. When something went wrong and no one wanted blame, they said Shadow had passed through. When a problem disappeared overnight, they said he had handled it. Shadow never corrected them. He moved through the city with practiced ease, his face forgettable by design. Plain clothes, muted colors, nothing that held attention for more than a second. He blended into crowds the way smoke blends into air. Survival had taught him that being seen was the first step toward being buried. That night, he was watching a warehouse on the edge of the harbor. Inside, a deal was happening that shouldn't have existed. Weapons, unregistered and freshly cleaned, being moved through a port that officially hadn't seen a shipment in weeks. Shadow wasn't there for justice. He didn't believe in that word anymore. He was there because someone had paid him to be. He waited. Patience was something Shadow learned the hard way. Years ago, impatience had cost him everything. Now, he let time bend around him. He watched guards rotate, counted cigarettes, memorized footsteps. When the moment came, it arrived quietly. 2 men stepped outside to smoke. Shadow moved. One man dropped before his cigarette hit the ground. The other never made a sound. Shadow caught the body before it hit concrete, dragging it into darkness like it had never existed. Inside the warehouse, the air smelled of metal and salt. That was when things went wrong. A door slammed. The city changed once Shadow stopped pretending he was alone. After that night in the abandoned building, he and Elena did not part as enemies or allies. They parted as 2 people who understood that crossing paths was no accident. Shadow disappeared before the sirens reached the block, but Elena stayed long enough to wipe her presence clean. By morning, the building was empty again, just another rotting structure waiting to be erased. Marcus Vale noticed the shift almost immediately. His people stopped answering calls. Routes that had been safe for years suddenly became traps. Money froze in accounts that were supposed to be invisible. Someone was pulling threads from the inside, and every thread led closer to him. Vale didn't panic. Men like him rarely did. He adapted. He leaked Shadow's existence. Street-level players were fed a story about a freelance killer who had outlived his usefulness. A bounty followed. Not official, not public, but understood. Anyone who delivered Shadow would earn favor that couldn't be bought. The city turned its eyes. Shadow felt it in the air. The way conversations stopped when he entered a room. The way unfamiliar faces lingered too long. He moved faster, changed patterns, slept in places no one would think to search. Elena did the same, but in a different way. Where Shadow erased his trail, Elena flooded hers, creating so much noise that no one could follow a clean line. They met again by necessity, not trust. A data hub on the south side went dark one evening. Shadow knew Elena would be there. The drive she carried needed power, access, and time. This place offered all 3, briefly. Inside, the hum of dying servers filled the air. "You're being hunted," Shadow said, stepping out of the shadows. "So are you," Elena replied, not looking up. "Difference is, I expected it." She had the drive connected, code scrolling faster than most people could read. Shadow stood watch, scanning entrances, counting exits. What happens when this go? The tower loomed like a broken finger pointing at a sky that no longer cared. Wind tore through the exposed steel, carrying the distant sound of sirens and gunfire from the city below. From up here, the chaos felt unreal, like a sickness spreading through veins you couldn't see. Shadow climbed without looking down. Heights didn't scare him. Falling had stopped meaning anything a long time ago. Elena climbed behind him, slower but steady. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been running for years. Tonight was the end of that run, one way or another. Vale's men were close. Shadow felt it before he heard it. The pressure of being hunted by professionals who knew his habits, who anticipated his pauses and shortcuts. This wasn't street muscle anymore. This was clean, disciplined violence. They reached a platform halfway up the tower and took cover as gunfire erupted below. Bullets rang against steel, sparks flashing in the dark. Shadow returned fire in controlled bursts, forcing the shooters to slow their advance. Every movement was calculated. No wasted motion. No wasted breath. "Elena," he said without turning, "if they get me, you keep going." She didn't answer right away. "If they get you," she said finally, "I finish it." That was enough. They moved again, climbing higher, the air thinning and growing colder. Shadow's shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him, but pain was just another signal. He filed it away and kept moving. Halfway to the top, the tower shuddered. An explosion tore through the lower supports, sending a violent tremor up the structure. Elena cried out as the ladder shook beneath her. Shadow grabbed her arm, holding her against the frame as debris rained down into the darkness. Vale wasn't trying to capture them anymore. He was trying to erase them. They reached the broadcast room just as the power flickered back on. Old equipment hummed to life, screens glowing faintly. Elena rushed to the console, hands flying as she. The night did not end with silence. It ended with exposure. By the time authorities reached the tower, the city had already changed. News feeds looped names that had once been untouchable. Bank freezes rippled outward. Arrests began before dawn. The systems that had protected men like Marcus Vale turned against them, cold and automatic, leaving no room for favors or threats. Elena was escorted out alive. She barely remembered it. Faces blurred together. Questions stacked on top of questions. She gave none of the answers they wanted. Everything that mattered was already out. The truth no longer belonged to her. Shadow was carried out on a stretcher, unconscious, bleeding, still breathing. Doctors later said it was a miracle. Too much blood loss. Too many wounds. A body that should have given up hours earlier. But Shadow had survived worse. Survival had always been his quiet talent. He woke 3 days later in a hospital room that didn't list a name. White walls. Steady machines. A window overlooking a city that looked calmer, almost unfamiliar. For a moment, he thought he was dead. The calm felt wrong. Then Elena stepped into view. She looked different. Not relaxed. But lighter. As if a weight she'd carried for years had finally been set down. "You're hard to kill," she said. Shadow tried to speak. His throat burned. She handed him water and waited until he could manage a breath. "So are you," he replied. They sat in silence for a while. No urgency. No alarms. Just the sound of life continuing without asking permission. Vale's empire collapsed fast after that. Too many people had been protecting themselves with the same secrets. Once exposed, they turned on each other. Some disappeared. Some went to prison. A few tried to fight it and failed loudly. The city didn't heal overnight. It never does. But the shadows shifted. Power scattered. Fear changed direction. Elena vanished again, but this time by choice, not necessity. She left behind enough testimony to protect he.